Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Variant Rules podcast. This is our third episode. We generally just kind of go over Reddit questions about Pathfinder 2nd Edition, talk about them, have a general discussion, possibly get interrupted by the rules lawyer. Looking at you, Ginger. But today I got Ginger, Ro, Xander, and Rack. We are the players of our campaign, if you guys are a fan. If not, check it out. Stream every Saturday. But here we'll just jump into it. The first question that we were looking at was and this will be more oriented towards new people. There's a huge influx of new people on Pathfinder right now. But one question that was asked was how to protect a party of squishies. Say you got a bunch of people who want to be casters or clerics or a witch, and you got like one tank or something. What kind of things do you guys think that a party could do to kind of protect when it's a lot of low AC players?
Well, since I'll go first, I definitely think it comes down to having the right, kind of like having someone that is a front line. Also using any of your environment to your advantage to slow down the enemy, like not just willy-nilly positioning and getting caught out. It's more playing to your group's advantages, whether that using control spells or even just properly debuffing the enemy and buffing your allies, like just knowing like who you can put yourself between to make sure that you're safe and adjusting accordingly to what like the enemy's doing. That's just my opinion on how to protect, a party of squishies.
Yeah, you never want to fight in the open. Let's say you have a 4-person party and you've only got one frontliner. You never want to fight in the open with a situation like that, especially when you're outnumbered, because there's only so much that the frontliner can do to prevent the enemies from getting to the back line. So choke points are key. It's even better if you have a fighter as your frontliner because they have attacks of opportunity that could potentially punish enemies for trying to run past them. Then the other biggest thing is, like Rack mentioned, crowd control effects from spells are extremely beneficial in those sorts of situations.
Now, also too, if you are the squishy, I think it'd be a good idea to, plan your turns. A couple turns ahead where, obviously you want to do damage, but, maybe use your first couple of turns to increase the terrain, buff your frontliner, perhaps, buff yourself with, some sort of spell that makes it harder for you to hit, mirror image, for instance. And then once all that's laid out, then, Master Blaster, go for it. Any input, Xander?
Yeah, so kind of building on what Savage said there, like mirror image can be huge if you have a caster that winds up in the melee. It basically just forces a percentage chance that they may just not hit you at all, right? Which wastes an action and forces them to have to come after you. Another thing is, especially if you've got a bunch of squishies and you're at ranged, either casting or as an archer or something like that, doing anything you can to try and cost the enemy's actions before they can get to you can be huge towards keeping you alive. So like crowd control, Ro's masterful use of Mud Pit. I hate you, Ro. Basically, like Mud Pit just makes everything difficult terrain. It costs them considerably more actions to travel through that, which, they might spend their entire turn just trying to get to you, and then as soon as your turn comes up, you run away, right? And now they're wasting their time trying to catch you again, right? So,
yeah. And if you are the one casting that, just be wary. Your melee players, especially your frontliner, may not be too happy because tanks tend to have less movement speed. So if you're reducing, you got to watch where you're placing that, because if you're reducing the movement speed of everyone in that area, that includes your frontliner. So you don't want to make it too difficult for him to get to you to protect you, or or make his move forward if he can't, he can't go very far because of the difficult terrain. So just you also got to be aware of the backsides of those when it comes to your own party. But once you get used to using a spell, you kind of figure out like what you can and cannot do, and then also work together with your team like we did when Rose specifically was using that so much. All us melee players, we picked feats that helped us deal with difficult terrain. So now it just became something that affected the enemies instead of the team as a whole, and we were just able to really destroy some mobs when they we could tap and then walk away, and by the time they got to us, they got no more turns.
Another thing to take into consideration as well is what sort of frontliner you have. Let's say you have a fighter who, let's say they have a reach weapon. That can cover a lot of area, but the ranged people are still going to want to hang well back, probably near maximum spellcasting range, to best cope with the fighter. However, if you have something similar to a champion as your frontliner, you're going to probably want to be within 15 feet of your champion. Just try to keep the enemies between, or to keep your champion between you and the enemies. But the champion can help you out a lot more if you're within that 15-foot radius, even if you're a ranged character, because a lot of their champion reaction specifically has that 15-foot limitation. So it just really just take into account, like, ask your frontliner what they can do, what kind of abilities they have, and adjust your tactics accordingly.
Yeah, all good advice there. So I think we'll move on to next topic, which was someone coming from D&D to Pathfinder was curious of how to deal with concentration. Specifically, when you use a spell that you can sustain for an action in the next turn, the guy was kind of flabbergasted that when you took that action on your next turn to sustain, it didn't cause a attack of opportunity. It just cost an action. And that I could be wrong because I've never really played D&D all that much. Never played it as a caster, but I'm assuming due to that question that was something in D&D. Is that true, guys?
Yeah. Specifically in coming over from 5th edition, there were concentration checks. If there's any spells that lasted, time, wasn't fire and forget, you could only have that thought on one thing. You didn't have to use an action to sustain it like you do in Pathfinder. And and coming to Pathfinder, there isn't any real concentration checks that you need to do. There are spells that, take an action, and then if you're raging like a barbarian, you can't do that. After that, like if it's the spell like Sunlight Sonata, like like the bridge that we used in our last fight last week, and it's like, oh, you place this bridge and you can sustain it. That is, every turn you have to take, or every round, take your action, sustain the spell, keep it going. If not, done. So there's not really like a concentration check in 2nd edition.
Yeah. So as far as like the concentration in 5e, basically, if you're concentrating on a spell to maintain an effect, and you get if you get hit with any sort of attack, you have to make basically what amounts to a saving throw to maintain that spell, or else you lose it. It's a lot different, quite a bit different in PF2e, where the concentration check comes in the form of if you cast a spell with another creature in melee range and that creature has an attack of opportunity, they can your manipulate actions when casting that spell trigger their attack of opportunity, and if they hit you, you have to make a flat check in order to not lose the spell. It's thankfully only a flat check of 5, DC 5. So there's only a 25% chance that you lose the spell, but there's still that chance. So the best bet is just don't be in melee with any enemy, and generally you should be fine. And once you've casted the spell, even if it is an ongoing effect that you need to sustain, this actual sustain a spell action only has the concentrate trait. So once you've casted the spell, you can sustain it for free without triggering attacks of opportunity, even if you're in melee combat.
Now, unless you got something to add on it, Xander, I was gonna kind of
So
yeah, go ahead.
With what Ginger was saying, where once you are sustaining that spell, since it only has to concentrate, there are feats out there that do allow attack of opportunities when you are taking it like a concentrate action, right? And there are also abilities and or spells that can prevent you from using anything with a concentrate trait, which will stop you from sustaining a spell.
Such as like fascinating or
exactly, yeah,
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, on the flip side, so that's all kind of player advice, but on the flip side, for a DM, I know not. At least we haven't gotten to high levels yet, so I can't say for sure. But for the most part, a lot of spells that you can sustain aren't too overpowered or too strong. But let's just say, for some instance, there just happened to be some niche spell that a caster has to keep sustained that happens to be kind of trivializing a certain encounter. What are some ideas that you can give a DM to help try to stop that character from keeping that spell going and making the encounter way easier than intended?
My first recommendation would be to pressure that character. Try to get some of your baddies into the back line and on that spellcaster. Because if you're sitting there putting like either damage pressure, or if you're actively trying to, like, say you're tripping them or grabbing them or what have you, you're taxing their action economy. And the biggest balancing factor for sustain a spell in Pathfinder is it takes an action every single round. And most spells, if you choose not to sustain them, the spell just ends. So you have to sustain it every round. Typically speaking, there's some spells that last even if you don't sustain. But generally speaking, it costs you an action every round, so that automatically cuts, like, you lose the ability to cast 3 action spells while you're sustaining a spell. Additionally, if you sustain a spell and you cast a normal 2 action spell, well, then you can't move and you can't reposition or get yourself out of trouble. So if the GM just puts pressure on by putting enemies, like getting enemies into melee with that character, even if they can't stop the spell from being sustained, that character is also limited if they want to continue that spell. They have to make a choice on whether or not they want to cast more spells or if they want to run away. So that's the biggest thing for me, is the limitation of action economy.
Yep. Also, the obviously mentioned earlier, fascination. It'll just ruin that completely.
That too. But not very many enemies have the ability to fascinate player characters. So
on to the next question. It was how to handle the making an impression action. So for this, it was basically like, say you have a big bad or very strong boss, and your bard happens to roll a nat 20 on making an impression, and trying to basically tell the big guy, hey, you should do that, or I don't think that's such a great idea, and then they roll a nat 20. What should you do as a DM in that situation when rules say that it should depending if they make the check, that creature should kind of go along with whatever the person said. But obviously, you don't want that when it comes to your big bad or a boss or something like that. So what do you guys think there?
So one kind of key thing to notice is that with make an impression, it does specifically state that even if you critically succeed, sorry, words are hard, it only increases the person or creature's disposition towards your character by like 2 steps or something, right? It doesn't actually include making them do something as part of that. It just makes them like you more, right? To actually get them to control the actions of another creature, even like let's say your big bad, you have to request, right? Which is a different ability, has different requirements, and then basically like that could be considerably harder even for your big bad kind of thing, right? But then a lot of it comes down to the GM kind of has to just gauge the situation and think not so much on, or at least in my opinion, think not so much on the rules as written for that, let's say Bard natty 20s that make a request, right? And requests that they drop their weapon and stop fighting or something, right? As a character for your big bad, for the GM, you kind of have to ask yourself, is there any situation where this big bad would do what this guy says, right?
Yeah. Well, there's
at all.
Well, like specifically talking, but even if you're looking at just rules as written, there are allowances for this sort of thing, because you consider that for make an impression, request, and for coerce, for that matter, the difficulty of those actions is modified by the circumstance that you're in. So let's say you're in open combat with something, and let's say you request that they drop their weapon through a request check or a coercion check. With a request, if you're in open combat with someone, I would count that as being an unreasonable request, which is automatically at least 1 degree worse as far as like judging success. So even a critical success to do that would only be a success.
Which has stipulations attached to it as well, potentially.
Exactly.
Right?
So
they might say they might just say, "Oh, I'll drop my weapon when your head rolls."
Yeah. And then as far as like, just because you request something of someone doesn't mean that you've changed their motivations or their desires, their personal desires. That just means that you've requested them to do a particular thing and they've agreed to do it. So as far as like, let's say they request your big bad to stop fighting and talk. Well, for one thing, there's already a feat for that, so I would try to avoid stepping on the feet. Basically, there's a 15th level feat for diplomacy skill specifically. You have to be a legendary in diplomacy in order to. You can basically request that everyone just stop fighting and talk it out instead. And because that in particular is its own feat, I personally wouldn't allow a request to stop combat or a request to for the enemy to drop their weapon when you're already in open combat, unless they have that feat, or if circumstances allow for that, even if they roll a natural 20. See, Pathfinder, and I feel like this question comes from someone who came from 5e. In 5e, a crit success is a crit success. And a lot of people blow those out of proportion anyway. But in Pathfinder, critical success is way less powerful. It just means you did a little bit better than normal, essentially. But yeah, I feel like I'm rambling now, so let somebody else talk.
I'm just curious. You guys, as you guys are players, say I'm the DM, right? And say Rack is the bard, and he rolls a nat 20, asking the big bad or whoever it was to drop his weapon and let's have a beer. All right. So he gets the nat 20, and then I, as the DM, respond with okay, and then I say. He drops his weapon, says, you know what, that sounds like a good idea. And then as he walks forward, he pulls out a different weapon or casts a spell and hits Rack immediately. The encounter starts and the boss is at front of initiative. How would you guys react to that?
I mean, I would say that was a very tricky move from the boss, but entirely correct, because Rack made a request. He fulfilled the request and immediately stabbed him in the back. But that is something different, right? And that is in character for a big bad of that caliber kind of thing, right? Like I would expect a double cross like that from a big bad. So that is entirely fine.
Then would combat actually even end at that point?
No,
because
I think it would begin. Oh, yeah, I guess.
Because if we would have to have like some sort of like sense of motive, like both sides are at that time, still at each other's throat. Like I'm just requesting a reprieve, like.
Yeah. But then a lot of that comes down to one, the big bads or the boss or the enemy's disposition as well. But then again, the GM has the power to set the DC for a check like that. And I'm of the opinion that if let's say you're requesting something of an enemy, right? They're openly hostile to you. If combat hasn't already started, it is soon going to be. I would mark that as a very hard DC for that request check, which in a lot of cases, a very hard DC for a creature, for an enemy creature of the party's level or maybe even higher. A very hard DC is going to be extremely difficult to complete. And in some cases, even if you roll a nat 20, because keep in mind the way degrees of success work in Pathfinder, when you roll a natural 20, that's not an automatic critical success. It's only a critical success if you meet the DC as a success as well. So let's say you roll a natural 20, but your check still doesn't meet the DC of the action you're trying to perform. You only get a success instead. So as the GM, you could just set the DC to an impossible DC without telling your players, of course. And at most they get a success when they roll a natural 20. And then you just have the boss act accordingly, because success on a request is they agree to your request, but with stipulations. Basically, they can set their conditions, and then you can agree to those conditions. I'll drop my sword
when your head rolls, right? And then be like, oh, okay, then
Yeah. So and then it's on the player to determine if they are willing to accept those conditions. But
I would laugh really hard if there was a party that agreed. Just turns on the party.
in a situation like that, the GM has the ultimate power over that. And the rules allow for situations like those to occur without being just ridiculous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also, like you said, I think it does come down to like the motives of the villain. Like a cunning villain, I would see them take the opportunity. And I'll offer them a drink, but then I'm also going to get, maybe try and poison some of their beverages, or, subtly call for some backup,
Just get a cheap shot in, yeah.
Yeah, like I could definitely see that if, like, you go off of combat, you're just giving them a little bit extra time and see if you can get any like sneaky stuff in as the DM, which would be fantastic, You're fall and get in the place of, fall into that false sense of security. Like, oh yeah, we did really well. And then
all the while his lackeys are sneaking around the back of the building or something,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
Which has happened to us in our campaign. We were in like open dialogue, and the enemies were sneaking around out of line of sight so that they could try to ambush us. It didn't work because we figured it out, but that was the original plan.
Or you could just legitimately have your bed, like, sit down at a table, have a bunch of beers out there, and say flat out, okay, let me hear your side. And then pick apart everything that your players say. That could be. All right. So next thing was question about attack of opportunity and kind of its interactions. Specifically, this one was if a creature next to me makes a ranged attack and I critically hit them with an attack of opportunity and I knock it prone because I have a flail crit specialization, would the creature attack before or after I knock it prone? And one thing that got pretty much immediately brought up was reactions resolve before the triggering action. So in that instance, they go to pull their bow.
Except for one unique circumstance. Specifically, when you stand up from prone, that's the only one where you complete the action before the reaction takes place. But yes, everything else, reaction resolves first.
With that one, basically they pull their bow to make that attack. You hit them, you crit them, they go prone. They lose that action. They don't get to roll that
they're
attack.
on their back.
They're just on their back. And then like Ginger said, other than getting up from the ground, like when you get up from the ground, the attack of opportunity happens after you're up. You're no longer flat-footed, so you don't take that -2 to your AC. So you don't just possibly get crit again and get smacked right down. I mean, you could still, but less of a chance with your full AC back to you. What were you gonna say, Ginger?
Is firing a bow a manipulate action?
I don't think it is, because it counts as a regular strike. Like, it counts as a regular strike, and I don't think they have
just a ranged strike. So this is a really weird interaction. Okay, so here's what I'm getting at. Attack of opportunity. When you critically strike a creature with an attack of opportunity, if the trigger that caused your attack of opportunity was a manipulate action, you disrupt the action that triggered your attack of opportunity. Now, making a ranged attack, say with a bow, is not a manipulate action. So even though it triggers attack of opportunity, their strike still goes through. But in the case that you critically strike them with a flail weapon and they end up prone, they fall prone before their strike goes off, but their strike still goes off. So basically they take a penalty for being prone on their strike, but the strike is not interrupted. It's a very unique case, but that was fun to work out.
Yeah, it's like basically you draw the bow back, right? You've got your arrow, you're primed. Guide sweeps the leg, you crash to the ground, you are still holding your arrow, but you basically fall to the ground, and as you hit the ground, you are quote-unquote prone, you release the arrow. Your attack still goes off, but now you've got the penalty for being flat on your back because dude swept your leg, basically.
Yeah. Which is basically they just take a -2 to that strike because they're prone. So
now if they were trying to pick up their bow from the ground, because let's say they dropped it or it was disarmed or they were trying to switch weapons, that is a manipulate action. And if you critical hit with an attack of opportunity on that, you do prevent that action entirely. So if they're trying to pick up their bow, they do not pick up their bow if you crit that attack of opportunity, and they have to try it again with another action.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I'm just like, the more I dig into this system, because even I wasn't sure how the interaction would go until I looked it up. But it's like I don't know if someone specifically thought of this, or if they just the rules are just so solid that things like that, there's just no problem with the resolution. There's no ambiguity. Just because partially because of the traits system, because basically everything has traits assigned to it. That's a huge boon to the system, in my opinion. It makes a lot of things easy to figure out. But yeah, that's really all I got to say on that.
Yeah, and then also, I don't know if you guys brought it up, but another thing is if you crit a caster with an attack of opportunity, they lose that spell.
Yeah,
Yes.
it fizzles
Yes.
out.
Now, specifically, they have to be casting a spell that uses somatic or material components. If it's a spell that only has the verbal trait, that actually does not trigger attacks of opportunity, because the verbal trait or the verbal component does not have the manipulate trait on it. It's only concentrate. So yeah, there's the spellcasting and attack of opportunity interaction with that also gets a bit crazy sometimes, but yeah.
Very good. Next question. What are some things as players we wished we knew earlier into Pathfinder?
Honestly, like, I read this question ahead of time and I tried to prepare an answer for it, and I really don't have one. When we came to the system, I basically just wanted to absorb everything. And I don't really have anything that I can think of that just like I really wish I'd known that earlier.
I would say for me, and the suggestion that, for newer players coming to the system, if you're playing like a spellcaster, like just sit down, read, and like try and dissect and understand what spells you're taking, what your class is able to, like, just learn your class. Do your due diligence, sit down, learn, and then like when you get to your first session, you should be able to use your spells without going like, is this right? Or just...
Yeah, and as we were learning, like there were I can't think of them right off the top of my head, but there were quite a few things that we had done and then weeks later learned, oh hey, it doesn't work that way. Like we all read it, we all agreed that it worked this way, and then just one day someone was reading it, or we saw a video or something like that of an explanation, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, we've been doing that wrong this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And then we learn and move on, and keep that new understanding of the rule. That's how we use it. That's if that's how it was meant to be used, that's how we do it. Sometimes when you first start using assurance, and your tank can just trip and knock every fucking thing over because assurance, and then you learn that's not how assurance works. Assurance is just
it doesn't get as many boosts as you think it does when you first read how the assurance thing works.
And like for Magus, we started playing right when Magus came out, and I think for weeks I think we even had discussions on it, that spell strike that doesn't trigger attack of opportunity. Why would that trigger attack of opportunity? That's not fair. It's this whole thing. But no, it actually does, and it makes sense. And there's feats to protect the Magus from getting interrupted when doing that spell. And then you also learn that it's not 5e. Not every monster has attack of opportunity. So when you're a Magus, like for the most part, you're probably safe with a spell strike. But every now and then, especially when your DM is tired of your shit, he's gonna
Tired of his
drop.
bosses getting one shot.
Yeah, exactly.
Looking at you, Ro.
And no, and that is where Starlet's fan comes in.
Yeah.
Because then you can one shot your bosses all you like, and there's nothing they can do about it.
I can't think. Other than just understanding, and especially if you're a caster, learning all the spells, and then the way feats work. I think understanding those really well is a good thing to know when you're coming in, and we might be weird, but a few of us, when we build a character for a campaign, we kind of basically build it from 1 to 20. We kind of know what we're going with. Now through the campaign, due to either role playing or how we feel, because we watched a new anime or something like that, and we get inspired by something we saw. You change it up throughout the campaign, but you basically we build 1 to 20. We know all the feats, what he's trying to do, like what this character is, and that was helpful too.
Yeah, I think the biggest recommendation I think for everyone, for new players, is don't try to learn every rule. Just know your character.
Yep.
That'll save you a lot of headache and a lot of trouble getting into the game. Because if you know exactly how your character works, all the rules are modular enough that you don't need to know everything. And if you know how your character works, that takes some of the weight off of your GM as well, for them having to know all of the rules, because then you just become an expert in this area of the rules, and you can help out the GM, be like, oh, this works this way, right? So that's the biggest piece of advice for any new player, I think, from everyone here at Variant Rules, is don't try to learn everything at once. Just know your character and know how their stuff works, and you're going to be 80% of the way there already.
All right, and so our next one, this one I'm just going to kind of open up to everybody. How do you guys feel about skills and using them in a session? So say, yes, if you're big on, if your character's big on lying, right? Obviously, you're going to put training into your what's that? Deception. Yeah, deception, and you're gonna go from trained, expert, yada yada. But how do you guys feel about someone who's untrained in something being able to do that thing at all? Do you think you should have training in order to even try, or do you think your training just makes you better at that and you should be able to try regardless?
I know for me personally, I would go with you can most certainly try, but someone who is crafted their lies or deception, obviously be better at deceiving their target than the on the whim. I didn't do that, officer. Like that's just how I feel. Like, reward the player who's invested in it, but the people who are on the whim, you never know. Maybe a stroke of brilliance might happen, spices it up a little bit. But that's just me.
For me,
sorry. Go ahead, Ginger.
Oh, sorry. If you know anything about our group by now, I'm the rules lawyer. For me, it's already laid out in the rules as to what sorts of actions require what sort of proficiency in a skill, and I feel like these are very fair. For the most part, like let's say you're dying on the ground, right? You wouldn't want any just random Joe off the street to come up and start trying to treat your wounds. I don't think.
I have a Band-Aid. Will this help?
Someone, it was like you would want someone at least with some medical knowledge, or at least a first aid merit badge, right? You wouldn't want somebody who doesn't know anything about what they're doing to be trying to fix you up. I feel like the same thing goes because in Pathfinder, the action to stabilize a dying creature requires you to be trained in medicine and to have healer's tools on hand, as does treat wounds, anything like that. For deception, like lying, anyone can lie. So I think that's fair because that's an untrained skill action. Whereas there are certain deception actions that do require you to be more trained in deception. And then at the same time, there are skill feats that interact with your trained proficiency as well, to make you even better at something, or to give you more versatility in that skill. My last point would be your skill training differentiates your character from another player's character. And this is a good thing because that means that one person can't just be good at everything. That way your character can have more of an identity within your party. So let's say I've trained my character to be the best medic, right? So my medic training is like, say I'm level 7. I've already got master proficiency in medicine. I've invested several skill feats into it. I should be the best at medicine.
Yeah, but let's just say that in an encounter, obviously, if you know whether it was because you caught the mob's attention for healing or doing too much damage, whatever it was, you go down and you're the team's medic, and nobody else has healing spells or anything like that. It's only a DC for 15 for the basic treat wounds. Do you think that no one else should be allowed to try to bring you up because they're not trained in medicine?
So if we're talking specifically, like if you go down and you're dying, treat wounds doesn't work unless you have the battle medicine feat, which already requires you to be trained in medicine.
Well, after encounter, you're down 0 health.
So if you're down 0 health and you need to be stabilized,
No, you're already stable.
You're already stable.
Death saves. You're just 0 unconscious. They just want to get you up.
Well, then it sounds like your party is dragging your happy ass back to town so you can recover after 8 hours.
That, or they're camping out and like they're defending you while they wait for you to wake up.
Oh yeah, it's the classic Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah. Because there
No,
are
I get
stuff
that.
for that.
I'm just saying.
I don't feel that that's
case where the person, your medic is down and no one else has anything to get you up. Do you feel that is it just because rules is written, or you just feel like no one should be able to roll medicine checks unless they're trained in it?
So with that, though, is that there is the improvisation feat, which does allow you to... Now, your bonuses will not be nearly as high as anyone who is trained, but it does allow you to take those trained actions without being trained. And there's a feat specifically for that you can invest in if you want. I was
going to say, untrained improvisation, the general feat, doesn't actually let you make attempt trained actions. That's specifically the clever improviser feat from the human ancestry.
Yes.
So that's just something humans can
humans'
do.
best race.
Yeah, well, it's just humans' most versatile race. But part of the reason I'm reluctant, so for me, it helps with immersion for things like that. Because like I said before, if I'm dying on the street or if I'm passed out, I don't want anyone who doesn't know what they're doing to be trying to heal me personally. I would rather it be someone who has some sort of medical training to be attempting to help me. Now, that's not to say I wouldn't mind them if I'm in a dangerous area, moving me to a safe area. That's another thing entirely. But I don't want someone trying to sew me up if I'm bleeding, if they have 0 medical training, unless it's a dire emergency. But even then, that's sketchy as hell.
And that could be something that could be up to like the discretion of the GM as well. If you're out of combat due to stable, and let's say they're just really not in a position where they can kind of stop or whatever, that might be a thing where the GM might go, you can borrow this healer dude's healer tools from his belt because he's unconscious, he's not going to care, and I'll let you make a check to try, right? Like that can be a GM discretion thing. Personally, though, I do kind of like the fact that you need to have at least some kind of training in order to take these trained actions, just because it can also be like a story building situation, right? Where something real bad has happened, the party has to make a decision. What are we going to do about this? Our healer is down for the count. And then on top of that, Pathfinder does actually encourage the party taking downtime as well, right? So that would be another situation where it's like, well, we might just have to take some downtime for a bit to let this guy heal up. And
or better yet, let's say a situation like that happens, and one of your party members is like, well, I don't know anything about medicine, but maybe I should, right? Well, let's take some downtime and let me retrain one of my skill proficiencies out of something else and into medicine. So now we have a backup healer. Let's say I'm not the best healer in the party. I don't know nearly as much as our guy over here, but in a pinch, I can help out, right?
Yeah, and I might have a chance of giving him back up.
And I get that, and I'm also getting the sense that you guys are talking about, like, if, say me and Ginger are both up, both good, and Ginger is medicine master, and I haven't even fucking touched it, and all of a sudden a dude, a hobo, or a damsel in distress, something comes up, needs some help. Ginger doesn't want me attempting to do this because he's built his character to do that. Now, I get that. What I'm specifically talking about is the ability or the allowance to allow people who, let's say someone got, kidnapped and they're on their own, and their rogue isn't there to lie, and they're not wanting to, tell the truth to the guy, or, you get these characters who are put in you get people who are put in a position where if their other partner, their other party member was there and was trained and could do this, they could do it, but they're not there, so it's on them. And that, would give them an opportunity to either one, roll it and, maybe possibly succeed, which then from that point on, maybe they start putting points into that thing because they were like, oh man, like I got this. Or two, they fail and then realize, damn, I really wish I had, Xander around right now. Or, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it, like, again, not trying to take away from people who have already built that way, but in a certain specific situation, it's all on this one person. I don't see a problem with allowing them to try to attempt that.
Well,
but that's
what I was saying before, where in those like super dire situations, that is entirely up to the GM's discretion on whether they want to give them a Hail Mary chance kind of thing. But that's entirely GM discretion. But then like rules as written, they would not have the expertise or the tools to, like, let's say, pick a lock. But as for what Ginger was saying before, in the case of lying, you don't need any special tools or training to lie. You might be terrible at it, but you don't need any special tools or training to do it. So, like, for lying or certain interactions like that, you shouldn't need training to do that. You're going to suck at it, but you don't need training to do it. But as for, like, picking a lock or something, I mean, you could give me a set of lockpicks. I have no clue what I'm doing, and I would likely just break those lockpicks in the lock and potentially make it worse if I even tried, right? Because I have no clue what I'm doing.
Yeah.
There is tiny chance that I might succeed, but
exactly. Yeah.
That would be like that. That would be, in my opinion, you would leave entirely up to the GM, and if they want to give you like the Hail Mary in like the super dire straits, that is entirely up to them, and you just kind of go with it with that. But that would probably be the only situation where I would kind of, if I was GMing, that would be the only kind of situation that I would allow like a freebie Hail Mary like that. right?
Yeah.
It would be a definite need for the situation.
The other thing too is like, if let's say you're in the situation where your healer is unconscious at 0 HP, and no one else has medicine training. In the 10 minutes that you could allow someone to spend trying to treat wounds when they're not trained in it, potentially failing, you could instead have the party spending that 10 minutes carrying the healer out of danger in the first place. So it all comes down to like there are always other.
Well, I mean that depends. That's situational, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
imagine
like,
even in our own setting, it's nighttime. You go down, and the longer we're in it, at night, the more possibility that shadows come up and make it harder for everybody because we don't have our healer. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
Well, that would be one of those situations where if I was the GM, I might allow like the Hail Mary toss, right? If it was real bad like that. But again, I feel like that has to be up to the GM if they want to allow something like that. That is, you're basically bending the rules as they're written, and that's entirely within the GM's purview to do that.
And that is always a possibility. I would argue that it makes for a better story in a situation like that, where the party is scrambling to try to pull their unconscious teammate out of the darkness, where the shadows are encroaching, and trying to get back to the light of their camp, hauling their teammate back. I feel like that makes for a better story than them trying potentially unsuccessfully to revive their teammate for 10 minutes while the shadows are coming in. When
you say that, but we take long rests after we're missing like 3 spell slots. Like, it's not.
Yeah, but again, our GM will let us do that because we take proper precautions. So it is entirely up to the GM, but I'm on the side of Ginger for like on a narrative standpoint. You can have some really cool like story moments and adventures when in those like high stress panic situations, right? Because in past campaigns, we've had Ginger actually get yeeted off to another plane, and we're like, we're level 3, we don't know what to do here. And that basically became a point where our GM had to basically write a little side story on how we were going to retrieve our friend. And it was literally just the dice decided that Ginger was going to get absolutely screwed, right? And it was, instead of it being a character death or character loss, which it very well could have been for any other GM, our GM decided to spin it into a story thing, which actually wound up being one of my favorite moments of that campaign.
Yeah, that took the campaign in a whole other direction because like we went on an adventure.
I mean, that has nothing to do with skill rolling, though.
I mean, you could also argue, the party fighting off while one tries to, resuscitate somebody that's bleeding out, stop the bleeding. You could argue that's also could make a good story point because you don't need to be trained. Like, there's people, in high risk situation, like, if you don't apply pressure to the bleeding wound, that guy's just gonna bleed out. Like, we know that, like, you gotta apply some pressure. You don't have to be trained to understand that.
I think we've spent entirely so much on this. So I think I'm alone here in thinking that.
I'm actually with you, Savage, on it. That's what I was about to say.
We're about 50-50, but
we're both.
I mean, like, that would be
which is fine.
It's
just opinions.
I will say I would be more inclined to allow a stabilize or administer first aid action from an untrained NPC or an untrained PC than I would be a treat wounds.
Because one will keep you from dying while one will just get you back up.
Yeah.
Right. And so like I'm tired. Like, again, it all kind of comes down to like GM discretion. But yeah, like I'm the same thing. It's like if you're stabilizing, that's a Hail Mary that I would totally allow, kind of thing, right?
Also, because that check is more difficult too.
Speaking of difficulty and dire straits, there was a question about new players. New players finding adventure paths very difficult, brand new to Pathfinder, and then jumping into some of these adventure paths and finding them difficult. What do you guys think about the little bit that we've actually played adventure paths so far?
I think with the adventure pass, like, because when we first kind of like dabbled in it, we were still like learning, and we're still getting used to it. Like, debuffing is super huge. Knowing when we should run instead of take an iffy fight, like that's one of the big things, is like knowing our limits as a group, as a party.
Mm-hmm. And
That's
tactics
also
make a huge difference.
also something I think to consider too for the adventure pass is that I'm pretty sure they are balanced for like a evenly distributed party comp kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
like a solid tank, a solid healer, maybe a range, maybe a caster, something like that, right? If you don't have one of those, it will be harder because the adventure path is basically expecting you to have proper healing coming in and stuff like that. And if you don't have that, there's a good chance that you're going to struggle bust it through a little bit.
Yeah. And I have a pretty good example so far. Just when we first were kind of starting that, we started the abomination vaults.
Oh, the flirks.
We had
the flirks.
Well, I'm actually talking about. I don't think I want to say the name. Just in case anybody's playing it. But there's a certain a puppet that shows up, and the first time that we had played through that, we almost TPK'd. It was very, very close. It was a very hard fight. We got our asses whooped. We thought we thought we knew what we were doing. Run back to actually just last night. Ginger has started running the campaign, and we have a new player with us, and then there's 3 of us that have already played, and we've been playing in other campaigns, so we've learned so much more. We ran into that little bastard yesterday, and other than one person taking a really big hit, we stopped that dude. Pretty handily.
People got dropped in that fight. The biggest thing was, so this creature in particular it's immune to a lot of status effects because it's a construct. It's 2 levels up on the party when you encounter it. It's a really nasty fight, and it's intended for you to because the other thing too is it's also positioned way out in an area that you wouldn't think to check first if you're just like searching room by room. So it's supposed to be one of the final encounters that you come across in the first level of this campaign.
And both times we encountered him way early.
Yeah. And so it's intended that you be almost level 2, not quite when you fight it. But the biggest thing is you're intended to have found some loot scattered around the first floor before you go fight him. There's a +1 weapon on the first floor among some other good things for the party to have, so that then those things make that fight way more manageable. Because if you don't at least go loot the rest of that level of the dungeon before you go fight that boss, you're gonna have a bad time. And it's still gonna be challenging even after you clear the entire first floor, just not as challenging.
I wouldn't know. I never made it past the slurks.
That's true. Oh, what's funny is we got past the slurk because my character can talk to reptiles, and I'm actually like friends with it.
I'm so triggered right now. So the reason. So anyway, back to my PTSD of Abomination Vaults. My party that we had was very it was not balanced really at all. We did not have a healer. We had kind of like this weird offcaster. My character was a rogue. We had a pixie that did stuff, and And then we had one other person who was also kind of like a monk, but kind of a rogue. So like we really did not have a designated frontliner. We didn't have a healer. And oh man, it got so bad so fast. And we basically we TPK'd twice to the Slurks because it was like a hard wall we could not get past.
So part of that was my own ineptitude as a GM at the time, because your party was bigger than the recommended 4 players. So I tried to adjust the encounter, and the problem with the Slurk is it's already a challenge for a level 1 party, and adding 1 or 2 additional players doesn't actually change its challenge that much. So by by increasing its level by 1, that murdered the party.
It had like a plus 17 to hit, man.
Yeah, it was like it was having a hard time not
my AC was like 14.
Just don't get hit, forehead.
I tried.
With that said, though, after learning what we've learned and everything, we even the second time that we went up against this puppet, it was even earlier than last time, and the fight was still way easier. And I think that was, from knowledge and building and character
also
building
just some
and
luck
like
as
that.
well.
That too.
It's just like you guys had
the dice are a fickle mistress.
Yep. But anyway, I think that is it for this week. Anybody with any closing statements?
Remember to like, comment, subscribe if you're new here.
Also, if you are still here, we would really like to do some PvP matches with viewers. So if you guys are interested in that, please check the Discord in the description and let us know. We would love to fight you guys. It would be a good time.
We'd love to do some big team PvP. The small team stuff, it seems to be pretty popular on YouTube. And we have a blast making it, but we'd like to do some big team stuff. So yeah, definitely hit us up.
I want you to get your hands off my wife's ball. That's all I'm going to say, man.
Again, thank you everybody for watching. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell. And if you're interested, we stream every Saturday, our regular campaign. And hopefully we'll see you guys there.
Thanks for coming, boys and girls and whoever.